Okay, welcome back. By this time, you may have a question. You say, all right, Johnson, or Dr. Johnson, if you'd like to be polite, but you can call me whatever you want. It doesn't bother me. How would you know that people are getting fully recovered? Well, let me explain that. To know whether you're fully recovered or not, we really need to measure what we're doing. So we're going to track results. We're going to measure and there are two ways to do that. One is what we call the expert approach, and that is where your doctor, your psychologist, asks you a series of very specific questions, and then he rates you, she rates you on your answers to that. So I would be the one judging whether you're fully recovered or not. However, there's another approach to this, the patient ratings. Now, when the patient rates himself or herself, actually, there are some real advantages to the patient rating, and one of them is, you may get a kick out of this. It turns out that if you complain to an MD, to a physician, that you're having all these side effects from your drug, they actually rate you as more recovered. Now, they don't intend to do that. That's not a conscious manipulation or distortion or anything. It's completely unconscious, but it's a really well-known factor in this. And so one of the reasons that psychologists use patient ratings is because it gets around that to quite an extent. People will say, how do you know your patients are being honest? Well, all measurements have some flaws in them, but our patient ratings are pretty good, and we know that generally they're a little bit better than the doctor ratings. It's just that that's how doctors are trained. The doctor rates everything, but psychologists, we're trained to ask people to rate themselves, and so that's how we do it. One is the CESD or the Beck. If the doctor you're seeing gives you either the CESD or the Beck, these are essentially very similar measures. Now, here's how we know, and I don't use those. I use the OQ45. It's a little bit longer. It's better, frankly. It's a better measure, in my opinion, than either of those. This has got 20 items. This has 21 items. The OQ45 has 45 items. A little bit better because it just asks more questions. On these, if you're from 0 to 9, then you're considered recovered. Yeah, see, so if you once you hit 9 or 8, you've made it. You've got, and then generally, your therapist would say, now we could start thinking about backing off here and seeing you less often. Why don't you come in a month and report, and I'll give you the checklist again. 10 to 17 is mild. 18 to 26 is moderate. 27 to 60 is severe. Okay, now, the bottom line here is, number one, you really don't need any medication until you get to about the 30 to 40 range in the CESD or the Beck. Why? Because a big study in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Holland and DeRubius and somebody else that did this study, it's very impressive. Why? Because it says that basically all the effect you get when you give mildly or moderately depressed patients an antidepressant, all the effect is what? It's placebo. There's no real medical effect there. So you're wasting your money if you're in these ranges here, mild and moderate. But in severe, especially if you get up above 30, 35, there's a genuine medical effect there, and then it's really worthwhile for you to take an antidepressant. Good. All right. Now, wherever you are, what we want to do is continue treating you until you get down to less than 10. See, once you hit 9, 8, 7, boy, you are totally in the recovered range. The trouble is that most doctors, most psychologists, most social workers are not measuring this every time. And so one of the things that you'll find if you come to see me is that I do measure your status as you come in, and I keep measuring it as we go through the therapy. So that makes a big difference. It actually turns out, remember I told you in the earlier video that around 5% of people actually get worse in therapy, not better. Well, we now know that you can cut that in half. You can decrease it by half if you just use an outcome measure every single session. Why? Because, frankly, counselors, the therapists, don't always spot when you're starting to get worse. We should, but frankly, we don't. We're not always as good at that as we should be. And when we're giving you a paper and pencil checklist at the beginning of every session, and we look at it and say, whoa, you're worse today than you were last time, that means I, the therapist, I need to shift gears. I need to change something. I need to approach this differently. I need to do something different from what I've been doing. Makes a big difference. So if you are seeing a counselor and they're not using this, tell them to get the CESD, which is free, by the way. You're supposed to pay for the Beck. Tim Beck would like you to pay him 10 cents every time you use the Beck Depression Inventory, and it hasn't gone up in 40 years, so 40 years ago, 10 cents was a lot more money than it is now. Frankly, most people don't do that, but you should. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the right thing to do. Anyway, the Beck or the CESD, if you're not using something like that every session, you really should. If you're being treated for anxiety, OCD, things like that, you really ought to use the OQ45 because it's a broader based kind of instrument, and we pick up on those kinds of things with the OQ45. Well, appreciate you stopping by. Again, if you're along the Wasatch Front and if I can be of any help to you, please give me a call. My phone number's here on this page. Be glad to talk to you about these things. Thanks.